BioCentury This Week is brought to you by RemeGen Co. RemeGen is a leading biopharmaceutical company in China committed to discovering, developing, and commercializing innovative biologic drugs to address unmet medical needs in patients with autoimmune and ophthalmic diseases and cancer. RemeGen's flagship drug, telitacicept, is a first-in-class BLyS-APRIL dual targeting fusion protein drug that has been launched in China for lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and is in late-stage development for various autoimmune diseases, such as myasthenia gravis, IgA nephropathy, and primary Sjogren's syndrome. RemeGen has research labs and offices across China and the United States.
Is tau the new amyloid? Leaders in the Alzheimer's field are big believers in tau, both as a target and as a surrogate endpoint. And they aren't letting a string of clinical whiffs deter them. On the latest BioCentury This Week podcast, we ask, is tau approaching a tipping point in Alzheimer's drug development? We'll also bring you up to speed on the latest with FDA, vaccine drama for one, and how cuts at the agency are slowing drug reviews, and regulatory advice for companies with programs in clinical development. Plus, Germany's Merck expands its presence in the US and in rare tumors via a nearly $4 billion acquisition. And our latest perspective, a look at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and what it could mean for Asian biotechs looking to go public. I'm Jeff Cranmer, and joining me on the BioCentury podcast today are my colleagues
Simon Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief.
Selena Koch, Executive Editor.
And Steve Usden, Washington Editor.
Okay, well, the AD/PD conference in Vienna wrapped up recently, and we saw a bit of data on tau. And Selena has been following the rise in interest in tau over the years. Selena, what's new?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I guess I framed it this way around could tau be approaching a tipping point? Because over the last few years, and then including at this AD/PD, there just seems to be maybe three trends coming together. First is around, you could call it the natural history of tau. So it's accumulation in the brain, it's spread through the brain, and its relationship. The relationship of those things to the onset, progression of symptoms, and to other biomarkers. There's just a wealth of information on that. There's also been a push by the Critical Path Institute and various academic groups to build the evidence base that would be needed for tau as a surrogate endpoint. And we now have data sets from two therapies that have raised hopes for tau as a target, not just an endpoint. And I think crucially what these two therapies have shown is that it's possible to intervene in tau pathology in the brains of patients. So therefore, you can really test the hypothesis about whether there's value in tau as a target. And then both of those produced some kind of tantalizing hints of efficacy that have also kind of raised hopes in the field.
Selena, you provocatively started your very interesting on analogies with the amyloid field. Can you talk a little bit about whether there are similarities or not, or lessons from that one, and why this might be the same or not?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you bring up tau as a target and you get eye rolls from certain people. They're like, oh, another one of those single protein pathologies that have been connected with this disease for ages and ages that have mostly led to failures, right? Yet everybody keeps going at it. Are they throwing good money after bad? Is it going to have a similarly anticlimactic finish to the story? And so, yeah, I started that way to kind of ask the question that way. But, there are reasons to think that tau could be different. Nobody knows how the story is going to end. So this alludes to that natural history I was talking about. Amyloid, when it starts coming up in the brain, it's decades before symptoms, and it's really diffuse. And people started looking at this very closely. What you can see is that tau starts to come up in a particular region, the medial temporal part of the brain, 4 or 5 years before symptoms and before progression to MCI or mild dementia. Or you can measure that smallest point change on the CDR sum of boxes that everybody likes to use in clinical trials. But when you can have some subjective memory issues that people can complain about, and this part of the brain is really important for memory. And then once you see tau escape that region and head either to the parietal part of the cortex, the occipital cortex, prefrontal, then you see progression to more like frank dementia. And exactly where it goes seems to correlate very well with the collection of symptoms. So somebody with more parietal occipital tau, the occipital part of the brain is where, vision information is encoded and spatial information. They have different symptoms than people who might have tau escaping to like the prefrontal, where they're going to have problems with executive function and planning and things like that. So there is a very close relationship to where tau is and when it spreads and symptoms. So again, it's a correlation, right? But
so how tight is that correlation? And by that, I mean, how often does it happen that you have discernible tau and tau spreading like that, and then people don't end up having symptoms?
Well, I don't have the precise quantification in front of me. It is a different story than amyloid in that regard. There's quite a lot of people who will have amyloid in the brain and not have symptoms. I mean, by definition, anyone who gets Alzheimer's disease at some point has amyloid in the brain and no symptoms anyway. The correlation's a bit tighter with tau. And really, once you see it escaping the medial temporal area, you got about 1 year before symptoms progress. So Fiona Elwood, who is the neurology disease area stronghold leader at Johnson & Johnson, was saying in her mind, that is what makes tau such a compelling target. It not only correlates with disease, it predicts it.
So one last question that, I don't know, may end up being a segue to later things on the regulatory front, but I wanted you to just expand a little bit on the efforts towards a surrogate endpoint in this field.
Yeah. So what we saw this year at ADPD was Johnson & Johnson sponsored a session where 6 different academics, or 5 academics and somebody from CPATH, gave a series of presentations, one after the other, all kind of supporting from different angles tau as a surrogate endpoint. So it really gave you this sense of this proactive consensus building in the field that maybe wasn't there at the time that Aduhelm got its approval based on a surrogate endpoint of amyloid PET. So getting ahead of having a drug under review with some consensus is probably a smart thing in the field. And so what CPATH has done is created a mechanism to somewhat harmonize some of the tau PET data. So analogous to a centiloid scale for amyloid PET, they've created a Centaur scale. It's just like a 1 to 0 way that you can quantify the signal and then compare between the programs so that you can put all that data together. Because the way that you get to a surrogate endpoint in this field, as we saw with amyloid, is you need clinical data sets from lots of different therapies, and you want to show that across those data sets, there is a relationship between the amount of reduction in the target, in this case tau, and the clinical efficacy outcomes. So yes, CPATH is very much involved in that and encouraging, their message to companies: share your data.
Selena, the efficacy data, what do we got?
Yeah, so there's all this great natural history data on tau, right? And it's compelling, but there's something critical that's still missing, right, from this picture, which is showing that if you intervene in it, you can, help patients, slow their disease. So that bit's still missing. But the reason why people's hopes have come up recently is that there have been 2 therapies by different therapeutic modalities, right? One is an antibody and one is an RNA knockdown type approach. So the antibody reduced the accumulation of tau over time from the control group. The knockdown approach actually reduced tau aggregates in the brain from baseline. So it cleared some existing aggregates, and nobody thought that that was going to be possible, because one of the key differences between amyloid and tau is that amyloid is an extracellular. This fragment of the precursor protein, it's released extracellular. That's where it acts, that's where it aggregates. Tau is just a lot more complicated. It mostly is an intracellular protein, but it can, misfolded tau seeds can escape cells and infect neighboring cells, and that's why they think antibodies might help stop that spread of tau both locally and between the brain regions. So the tau antibody on PET slowed the accumulation of tau over time. That was the UCB compound. It did not meet its primary efficacy endpoint in phase 2. It did meet the secondary efficacy endpoint in that population, that full population. So it's not a clear win by any means. But, as Toby Ferguson of Voyager Therapeutics was saying to me, you can look at that as glass half empty or glass half full. He's like, what they've definitely shown is that with an antibody in the brain, you can decrease accumulation of tau, which nobody had done before. And there is an endpoint that could have been the approval one. These endpoints are used differently in different trials where it seemed to do something. And, the next generation of antibodies, like Voyager's, they're really trying to home in on the right bit of tau because tau is processed in lots of ways. It can be phosphorylated at different sites and to different degrees. And so Ferguson's point was just that, you want to be targeting pathological tau. And do we really know the pathological species of tau? Well, obviously that's in question. But what you can do operationally is you can stain patient brains and stain control brains and show that your antibody stains in the case of the disease and in the places where it should be, tau pathology should be, and not in these healthy brains. That's what Voyager means by saying its antibody is pathologic tau specific. And that is a term that Fiona Elwood of J&J also used about their antibody. And so I think, and data from the J&J compound are coming next year. The bigger phase 2 data set from the RNA knockdown approach, now this is Biogen and Ionis, that's coming next year. It did some interesting comparisons with previous data sets in phase 1, which suggested it could have a big therapeutic effect. We'll see if that actually plays out in big phase 2 next year. So together, getting towards that tipping point of knowing if this target has value.
All right. Yeah. So it looks like we got to be a little bit patient before we're going to get some of this juicy efficacy data. But in the meantime, that gives you time to read Selena's story on this. It was a deep dive, and you can find it at biocenturypodcast.com. In the show notes, I'll drop in a link. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll turn to Washington.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Grand Rounds. BioCentury's R&D conference will return in 2025 to the US and Europe to debate key bottlenecks in translation and unlock scientific breakthroughs with commercial potential. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore cutting-edge advancements in early-stage R&D as we dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Join us in Chicago this June after ASCO for the second BioCentury Grand Rounds US, and in Cambridge, UK this September for the inaugural Grand Rounds Europe. Register and learn more at biocenturygrandrounds.com.
Okay, we're back, Steve. There's been some drama around vaccines. I guess not too surprising, given who the new HHS secretary is. And let's see, we've been hearing some word about some delays. What you got, Steve?
Okay, so this is about the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine. It was supposed to be approved. The PDUFA date for it was April 1st. It wasn't a joke. And FDA was poised to do it. They'd send over the communications to HHS for routine checkoff, and it was going to get approved. It didn't happen. The reason it didn't happen is because FDA Commissioner Marty Makary held it up. He referred it to a political appointee in the office of the commissioner, which is absolutely without precedent. It's never happened before. At least that's what people tell me. And then we didn't really know what was happening until last Friday. Last Friday, Novavax reported that FDA had told it that it wanted a post-marketing commitment to generate additional data. People heard that and thought, oh, well, they're going to create some kind of a registry, or they're going to, follow people closely who have received the vaccine to get adverse event and efficacy data on it. The Wall Street Journal reported Friday evening that actually what FDA was going to require was a large-scale clinical trial that could cost tens of millions of dollars. On Saturday, FDA Commissioner Marty Makary posted a comment on X with a link to the journal's story. He said, to be clear, this is a new product that Novavax is trying to introduce to the market with a study of a different product from 2021. That's when the vaccine got emergency use authorization. And he said that new products require new clinical studies. There are a lot of things that were to unpack in that were really unusual. First, it's extraordinary for an FDA commissioner to comment on a pending application. That's something that really isn't done. X isn't usually the preferred vehicle for communicating regulatory information to the public. And it was also extraordinary that he says that this is a completely new product and it's going to need a new trial. And it really isn't certain then what he's talking about. Is he talking about a pre-market trial or a post-market trial? Then on Sunday, HHS spokesperson Andrew Nixon sent a note to journalists elaborating on McCarry's comment. He said, using the COVID epidemic as an eternal justification for blanket approvals of new products will not happen under the leadership of Commissioner McCarry. And then he said that the Novavax vaccine is a new product because it's targeted at a different COVID-19 variant than the vaccine that received an EUA, and because trials from 4 years ago conducted in people without natural immunity no longer suffice. That argument set off alarm bells among vaccine experts and public health experts who basically said it's a mishmash of unscientific statements that really suggest that, that things are going off the rails. BioCentury is going to be publishing a commentary later today from Phil Krause, who was the deputy head of the office at FDA that reviewed vaccines up until the time that he resigned during the COVID epidemic, and by Luciano Borio, who's the former acting FDA chief scientist, where they basically say that this is not a scientific approach to take, and it raises concerns. It raises concerns about how FDA is going to handle vaccines, and it raises concerns about FDA's scientific integrity.
Okay, Steve, gosh, there's so much to unpack there, but I do want to say this thing. The very fact that Commissioner McCarry responded as he did in the ways you articulated, 2 or 3 of the ways that were very unusual, really suggests to me that he knows how either outrageous or controversial or something this is. Why the need? FDA issues hundreds of decisions weekly, if not daily. The very fact that he responded to this sort of suggests to me a little bit, maybe the lady doth protest too much, a little bit on the back foot there. Is there a lot going on behind the scenes with this? What do you think is going on?
Well, I think that what's going on is that McCarry had to make a decision. He had to make it on the first day that he was commissioner, which is he going to uphold the traditions and law and standards that FDA has adhered to for a very long time of having civil servants make science-based decisions about regulatory applications, or is he going to pursue an ideologically or a politically motivated strategy that is consistent with the claims that HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and others in the Make America Healthy Again movement have made, that make it clear that they're adamantly opposed to vaccines in general and to COVID vaccines in particular. Prior to his confirmation as HHS Secretary, Kennedy made statements saying that COVID vaccines, and he didn't differentiate between different types of COVID vaccines. He said that COVID vaccines are deadly and that they've killed more people than they've saved, and other statements like that.
Sorry, I think you should say incorrect statements like that.
Yes, incorrect statements like that. And so I think that McCarry, like everybody else who's running public health agencies in this administration, is facing a challenge. They have to decide whether they're going to basically adhere to the standards of science and public health, or if they're going to make decisions that are consistent with the views of the HHS secretary. And in this case, it looks like it's the latter. We still don't know. We don't know how the whole thing's going to come out. There's a tremendous amount of controversy that's been raised by this, and it's entirely possible that at the end, that Dr. McCarry will make a decision that is consistent with public health and with good science.
Okay, Steve, you have been hearing about delays at FDA. Finally, we heard FDA itself acknowledge that there has been at least one delay. What went down?
Yes, people at FDA have been telling me that firings, layoffs, cost cutting, and morale issues are slowing regulatory decisions. They've also said that the agency is going to prioritize meeting PDUFA goals. But there are an awful lot of other things that FDA does that need to happen, and they need to happen in a timely manner, or there are problems. So what happened is, most recently, is that on April 18, FDA filed a legal document saying that it was requesting a delay in a hearing regarding an appeal of a complete response letter that was received by Vanda Pharmaceuticals. We don't have to go into the details of the CRL or Vanda or something. That's really not what I'm talking about now. The key thing is that the memo said that the reason that they needed the delay is because FDA has experienced a significant reduction in force on April 1st, including in the offices that were assigned to lead the review and draft the written response to the particular matter that they were talking about. They also said that there were other problems, and the problems that they said that were affecting their ability to comply with this deadline are things that obviously will go beyond just this case. They said that the RIF impacted leadership of the CDER Office of New Drugs. That's a reference to the fact that OND head Peter Stein was forced out, as well as CDER review divisions, and also reviewers' access to subject matter experts, administrative support staff, library staff, and academic journal subscriptions. And those are all things that I've been hearing from people in the agency, that they've even had their access to academic journal subscriptions cut off, something that makes it difficult, if not impossible, to do their jobs.
What's the impact on INDs?
We don't know. There's been speculation about it. That's the other thing. There isn't a lot of transparency from FDA. We don't know how many people have been fired, laid off, or resigned. I've heard and I've reported that as many as a quarter of the review staff across FDA's medical product divisions have announced their intention to resign. And as a result of that, they've been recused from some of their review activities. About INDs, here's the thing. When a company submits an IND to FDA, it goes forward if the company doesn't hear something to the contrary from FDA within 30 days of their submitting it. The problem now is if FDA isn't making decisions, or if it's being slow about making decisions because of these issues that I've discussed, if a company goes forward with an IND because they haven't heard anything from FDA, there's a concern that the fact that they haven't heard anything from it isn't actually a thumbs up. It may just be a symptom of these staffing cuts at FDA. And it may be that they're going to hear later that actually there was a problem with the IND that FDA just wasn't prepared to announce in that 30-day period.
Yes. Steve, I just want to say that I was out and about and talking with Biotechs last week, actually, Biotechs and others last week. And one person specifically said to me they're very worried that there's going to be therapies or candidate molecules going into people that actually aren't safe because they just didn't hear in time. As you say, it's not an endorsement. And so I very much hope that doesn't happen. I don't know whether FDA is triaging to prevent that kind of thing. I mean, there's obviously a very difference between a green light and a lack of any light in terms of being able to move forward. That's an area that will be watched.
Definitely concerning. Well, Steve, you'll continue to keep us up to date. I know you have a little time off coming up. I'm sure nothing will happen while you're away. Let's talk a little M&A. Germany's Merck is acquiring SpringWorks. Now, this has sort of been the worst kept secret in the deal-making world. There's been months of rumors that a deal could be on the way. Today, we finally get it, valued at $3.9 billion. Premium, it's about 17% higher than SpringWorks close from back in February before the first published reports that a deal might be in the works. SpringWorks, of course, launched about 8 years ago. Pfizer spun out 4 programs into the company, launched with a $103 million Series A led by Bain and OrbiMed. So what does it do for Merck? It gives Merck, it really helps the oncology portfolio. 2 of the SpringWorks programs are now approved, a couple $100 million in sales, and those drugs are under EMA review. One of the programs for desmoid tumors, and the other is for treating neurofibromatosis type 1, so some rare diseases there.
So, Jeff, Selena, Been a little bit dry on the M&A front. One swallow does not a summer make. So I'm sort of wondering what kind of impact you think this might have in terms of sentiment.
Well, I can give a little color on the background this year so far, right? We've like the year opened with the big, almost $15 billion deal of Johnson & Johnson buying Intracellular, and we saw another $1 billion deal that week. And then February had one big M&A, but it was a private equity deal, so not even like a pharma buyer. And then it's been, in terms of the big deals, quiet since then. And I think, there's just been a huge amount of uncertainty in the market, the public market. So that can make it hard to like pin down value and make people kind of maybe push pause on getting that deal done. Is this going to change that? I don't know.
Well, M&A, we thought it was going to get a little bit hotter given how dismal the capital markets are. But Jeff, you've been casting your eye east in terms of capital markets. Tell us what you're seeing in those distant Asia lands over there.
It's west from where I sit, but
It's west from everybody. It depends on you went.
It really depends where you're sitting. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we were both in Singapore in March, Simone, and at that time, in the hallways over cocktails on some of my panels, bankers were saying really the only place for Asian biotechs to go public is NASDAQ. It has the liquidity, it's validating, gives you room to run if you want to raise further money. People saying ridiculous to consider going public anywhere else if you want to have a legit IPO, and what a difference a month makes. The Hang Seng index really reflects that things are on the up and up in Hong Kong. I spoke with a longtime Asia VC who said that the Hong Kong exchange has been setting record after record in terms of volume. China is green-lighting some of the larger A-share companies to seek a dual listing in Hong Kong. And what we're seeing is that liquidity is really going to make the market quite a bit better for Asia biotechs who are looking to go public. My source said that more than 100 companies have rushed to file. We know that there's about 20 biotechs in the IPO queue, and Duality, sort of a closely watched China biotech, had a great IPO. It came in with a valuation of over $1 billion.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Duality and how significant you think that's going to be. Is everybody watching like its success? Is that going to make a difference?
I think so. I mean, I talked to another CFO of a company that's been hoping to go public for a long time. He told me, or at least when I talked to him back at JP Morgan, they were thinking NASDAQ, 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 and now they're looking at Hong Kong as well. They're in a pretty validated space in cancer. You really need to be a company with validated technology. You need late stage assets, ADCs, bispecifics, deals with Western companies also validating. So it's not like we're going to see a rush of like speculative companies getting out, but it is good news. I mean, China has been in a bear market for a long time, and it seems like now there's a pathway for some of these companies that have kind of been bottled up to get out, to get some money back to their shareholders. Duality, BioNTech is a partner. I think BioNTech was one of the cornerstone investors, so maybe they're a little bit different, but we do have some companies like GenFleet in the IPO queue. They're in KRAS, but they are the leading KRAS company in China.
Hey, Jeff, that increased volume and liquidity on the exchange. Do you know if I'm assuming that's a kind of a broad statement. Does it extend to the biotechs on that exchange?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at those data. My sense from talking to people is sort of a rising tide, all boats kind of thing. The deep seek moment has definitely created a lot of energy over in China and Hong Kong. As I said, Duality stock more than doubled in its debut. It's held. We saw another company get out in Hong Kong early in the year, Brain Aurora, and its stock rose more than 120% from IPO to the end of the first quarter. It was one of the top performers. So companies are watching this. I know WeChat was blowing up when Duality got out, so let's see who's next, but I do think the energy is going to carry through. Okay, link to my perspective on all this. I'll drop it in the show notes. You'll be able to catch up with Steve's story today, and of course, Selena's great Tau piece that is already up on our website. We will catch you next week. Thanks for tuning in. And a thank you to Kendall Square Orchestra, which provides the music for BioCentury's podcasts.
BioCentury would like to thank RemeGen for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about RemeGen's products and pipelines, you can go to www.remegen.com.